Carson, Leno, Fallon. Now, it's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today about to have a conversation with Paul McSharry of Osiris Wine Club. Introductions in just a moment. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for your podcasting. Hey, have a listen. This is an incredible story with May Eliane Lonkesong. I released it a couple of weeks ago. She was 15 when the Nazis walked into Chateau Pichon, the Comtesse, and shot the place up. I mean, if you want to hear the history of wine and how it affects what you're drinking, you need to listen to the story. It's about 75 minutes long. She starts from her youth and ends up where she's at today, which is in South Africa with a winery called Glenelly. Great conversation, and many more of those to come. But not while we're here today. We're here to talk to Paul McSharry of Osiris Wine. Did I say it wrong again?
Osiris, yeah.
Osiris, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
In fact, I'm glad you said Irish accent, you know, the Irish in me, because I don't know why I was having trouble placing this, but you're from Irish descent.
I am. So it's yeah, I've got a bit of an amalgamation of different things going on, I guess. You know, I'd say it's definitely more British. You know, I grew up in London. I was born in Ireland, but moved to the UK when I was 4, so very young. And my father's job took us over there. So grew up in the UK and went to college there, and then moved back to Ireland kind of briefly after college for a number of years, 4 or 5 years, before then coming out to California, which is where I am now. And I've now been here for 12 years. So yeah, it's been a journey. But I'd say it's definitely British, the accent, but a bit of an Irish twang here and there, I would say.
That's what I think it is. And I just heard it recently. I don't know if you know this woman, but I just heard this accent and I had the same problem. And that is Anne McHale, who's a master of wine out of London. But she's born in Belfast, and I sensed the same thing. I should have been able to place this.
Yeah.
But that was the question I asked her. Really was, wow, that's kind of an interesting. Because Belfast, we're not really known for wine. Certainly, that part of the world's not known for wine, whiskey and beer maybe. But how does somebody from Ireland, of course, England has a lot to do with wine, but how does that happen?
It's a good question, and it's definitely not your typical route. You know, I didn't go to college to kind of learn viticulture. I came from a completely different background. You know, as we've said, I grew up in the UK and went to college in the UK and studied media. I did a media degree. You know, at that time even, you know, wine was kind of alien to me. I knew it because it was something that was present in the home. You know, my parents enjoyed wine, but, you know, by no means connoisseurs, that they enjoyed good wine and it was always there. But I wasn't a big wine drinker. You know, I knew very little about it. And my parents actually, they purchased a house in Cape Town, just outside Cape Town in South Africa, years ago, when I was still in college. And they would spend, at this stage, they had moved back to Ireland from the UK. They'd retired, and, you know, they wanted to escape the Irish winters. And of course, in South Africa, it's Southern Hemisphere, so their summertime is our winter time in the Northern Hemisphere. So they would jet down there in December and spend 3 months escaping, as I said, the terrible Irish weather. And I would go and visit them. And I would fly out there and spend maybe a week or two with them down there. And, you know, they would say, "Oh, take the car and go off and you know, kind of explore a little bit." And
where were they? In Cape Town or Stellenbosch? Or
they're in Cape Town, just outside Cape Town, a beautiful little town called Camps Bay, which is right on the ocean. Kind of a nice seaside community just outside of Cape Town, but, you know, not from the wine region. So they, you know, I would jump in the car and, you know, what was close? It was wine regions. So I would go down to Constantia, which was very close. That was really on our doorstep. And then I would go on to Franschhoek, which is a gorgeous little town and wonderful wineries. Stellenbosch, as you said, you know, there was so much around there, you know, wonderful wine regions and wonderful wines being produced. And that kind of made me kind of learn a bit more and get more into it. And you know, I kind of decided I'd love to learn more about this, and went back home. And I was living in Ireland at the time. I was working in an advertising agency in Dublin. And I went back and I just said, you know, I'd love to start doing some wine classes and learn a little bit more. You know, I kind of knew what I liked, and you know, I knew, oh, I like this. I tend to gravitate toward this kind of a varietal, or, you know, this kind of a style of wine. But beyond that, I didn't know too much about it. But I was, you know, I was fascinated by the history of it. I was fascinated by the science of it to some extent. Enrolled in a WSET, you know, the Wine and Spirits Education Trust courses, and started right at the beginning, started with the beginner's course and went on to the intermediate and then the advanced, the level 3. And, I was just learning. I was learning as I went on. And
let's stop there for a second. You hit a couple of things that are important. I don't want to just gloss over them. In fact, when I was talking about May Eliane Langsong, who came from Bordeaux, and she lands now, and at 75 years old, she starts a winery in Cape Town and Stellenbosch area. And I thought, well, that's kind of fascinating. This is, she's coming from one of the most prolific wine regions of the world, and having her family own some of the most prolific wineries in Bordeaux, Chateau Palmer, Chateau Siron, Chateau Pichon Lalonde. What is it about South Africa that was so intriguing? What, the wines, the terroir, the hills, the soil? I mean, you've obviously fell in love with it. Why would a Bordelaise do that? Is there something unique about it that?
I think that's the thing. I think you're right. I think people still call South Africa, New World, and it's absolutely not. The first Huguenots went out there in the 1600s. They've been making wine there for hundreds of years. This is not a new wine or grape growing region. And like I said, it's such a misconception. And I think, to be honest, there was other social factors obviously that were involved, and South Africa was a very different country up until, the early 90s, when obviously things changed. And I think because of that, people were not maybe visiting it. I know certainly, it wouldn't be a surprise to a lot of people that it wasn't a destination that people would have chosen to go to and maybe experience as much. And obviously there were trade embargoes imposed on them, because of the situation that was going on down there. Obviously, I don't want to go too much into that, but I think everyone knows what I'm talking about. So I think, the rest of the world wasn't getting exposed to a huge amount of South African wines, maybe, and people just weren't familiar with them, and they didn't realize the quality that could be achieved down there. And it's incredible, when you go down there, you think of certain parts of the world where they're very much famous for certain varietals, and they associate with certain varietals. In South Africa, they kind of run the whole gamut. There's everything. I mean, they do pretty much, certainly all of the major varietals that we would think of. And then so much more. And, it's such a diverse place in terms of climates and different things like that, there's mountainous regions, there's valley floor, there's coastal, it has all of that. So I think it's quite diverse in that sense. But yeah, they're producing fantastic wines, and it kind of led me on to my first foray into the wine business. So.
Well, it's kind of interesting you said it, because you used the word New World as part of South Africa. And certainly, I think anybody in the industry that's grown up in the last 20 years in the industry would still argue that's New World, Old World, and maybe that's a style now. Maybe it's just the definition of the soil and the history of the appellation. But I just read that I think the MW, I know it's the Court of Sommeliers of the Master of Wine program, dropped the use of old versus new world wines. And I thought that was fascinating. And I suppose because the lines have been blurred in that style, but I still think it defines something. I still think that the history of the terroir and the history of the appellation has a lot to do with what's in that bottle. But for whatever reason, have you read this, that they dropped the I just saw it somewhere.
Yeah, I did. I did read about that. And it is interesting. I think, of course, they've dropped it, but it's going to take I think a long time before that leaves our vocabulary. I think people are so used to differentiating and describing that, or using it as a way. I remember when I did my WSET classes, and one of the things we did in our advanced level was, the blind taste test. And the first question that we were asked, or one of the first questions was, is it New World or Old World? So, I think it's a long time before it drops out of the conversation, as it were.
Well, I don't know if taking it out of the definitions of the Master of Wine program means anything globally to the people that still use it and want to use it. And I have this sort of funny, I did a tasting the other day with a bunch of enophiles, and that was the first thing you kind of looked for. You kind of just tried to decide, like, globally, was this wine of a recent appellation or style, or is this going to be older? And that was how I got down to a couple of the decisions I made, was starting with that, splitting it in half. And so taking out half the world when trying to figure out what this wine was. But then I had this other thought. I don't know if you've had any Armenian wines lately, but they're coming of age now. They're starting to learn how to make wine there after the freedom in 1991. But they've been making wine there for well over 6,000 years. We know this from the winery they found, but at the same time, the Russian when the Russians were in, or when the USSR was taking over, they weren't allowed to do anything other than make brandy. So the whole industry stopped for 100 years or 25 years. So now we're sort of new worldish, right? We're using newer technologies and newer ideas to make wine from a very old place. So I don't know. I guess maybe there's some confusion there. But tell me, I'm so interested in this in your wine club, and this is not just a club, because I was in the wine club business for 35 years, where we selected wines for people. What was the impetus for this idea, that this soup to nuts? Tell the listeners about what it is.
Okay, so Osiris, I founded it last year, and it's a relatively new business, but what I like to call it, I guess, is I call it a private members winemaking and luxury lifestyle club, because whilst the winemaking side of it is, it's the focal point, and it's what probably draws people in, there is so much more beyond that. So then, another thing I kind of call it is I like to call it a luxury lifestyle ecosystem, because we're pulling different parts of that. I think wine is so closely associated with, obviously, gastronomy and travel and all these other wonderful things. But basically, members have the opportunity to blend their own private barrels of wine with fantastic wineries all over the world. I've developed partnerships with wineries in Burgundy, Bordeaux, Champagne, Chile, Argentina, Italy, and of course, being based here in California, a number of wineries in Napa and Sonoma. And basically, some of these wineries, like some of the wineries we're working with up in Napa, the Debate, AXR, through Jean Hofliger, a wonderful winemaker. These are 100-point wines. These are coming from some of the best vineyards in the world. Tokalon and Beckstoffer.
But why do I join? Why do I call up Paul McSharry and say, "Hey, I want to participate"? What am I doing?
I think it's the opportunity, to be able to make something that is completely unique to yourself, and it's a wonderful experience. It goes beyond just buying a case of wine or having a subscription to a wine club. You are physically as involved or as little as you want. You can fly up or come into Napa, that one time a year, many times a year, but for the blending in particular, you come up and you'll work side by side with the winemaker. And, if you've got a cat that's, pulling some, from different vineyards or different parts of the vineyard, you'll blend with him or her and, come up with something completely unique to you, completely unique and specific to your taste profile. So you might say, well, I love that style of wine, but I get to kind of tinker around and be a part of it. You are essentially becoming your own winemaker. And then we have wonderful label designers who have designed cult labels for fantastic wineries in Napa and beyond, who then can sit down with you and come up with a concept completely unique to you as well. So personalize it even furthermore. And then beyond that, then there's a complete concierge service where we can plan your wine trips, not only to Napa and Sonoma, but all around the world. We're partnered with Quintessentially, who's the largest lifestyle concierge company in the world. And, so you may say, oh, well, we're going to be going out to Bordeaux at the end of April, beginning of May to blend with our winery out there, to blend our barrel of wine. But, we're coming out from California. We've got, we're not going to fly out just for 3 or 4 days. It's a long way to go. Let's make it a trip. We'd love to get out to the south of France. What can we do there? We'd love to have someone help us plan a trip, and they can call up their one-on-one lifestyle manager at Quintessentially, and they could say, oh, well, we have the Monaco Grand Prix going on. We can get you paddock passes. We can get you, your rooms. We'll sort your rooms out. We'll sort out all of anything you want. If you want to go into Provence and taste wines, we'll sort that out for you. We will, book all your restaurants, whatever it may be. Any luxury lifestyle experience they want or want to be part of, they can help with that. So we're trying to offer them this whole service. So
I'm glad you use that as an example, because we are headed to the Monaco Grand Prix. Okay. And I tell my friends or people that are joining us, I said, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, but this is our 3rd time. So
there you go. Well, I mean,
it's so much damn fun
next year as well. So
it's so much damn fun. Well, that's the thing. So the why am I having trouble? Osiris.
Yeah.
Osiris. I'm interested in understanding the lifestyle of wine. This question mark. Am I interested in what it takes to make a wine? And am I interested in just immersing myself in what I see as a very luxurious, romantic industry? And we'll talk about how it isn't in a minute. But Is that why I'm doing this? I mean, this clientele base must have a diverse reasons to call you up and say I joined.
Absolutely. And, it's a great question. And, there definitely is, everyone would be interested in it or for very, very different, for different reasons. Some people love the idea of making a fantastic wine from, a 100-point winery, but something that is just a little bit more personalized. And they may say, well, I don't need to be so much a part of the blending or the actual physical side of it. I would just love something completely personal to me, something that is bottled and packaged in something that is unique to myself. Or, it could be someone, we're working with a lot of, we offer a corporate membership as well. So that's great as well, because someone might come to us and say, we'd love to make something for our company. And it would be something that is personal that we can send out for corporate gifting. And then we can help them. And they say, we'd love to do our offsites up in Napa. So we can plan that for them. And they can have blending sessions for the guys that work for the company. And we could host dinners for them or whatnot. There's people looking for it for different reasons. Some people just love the idea and they want that experience. They want to be, in the winery and really kind of experience that side of things. And again, that was where the idea came from. It kind of after COVID, where everything was closed up and people weren't able to do all these things. And I think people were craving experiences and something different and to go beyond. So
I think that's true.
Yeah, so that's where it kind of came to me, and
So you've touched on a lot of stuff, but it's kind of interesting. You blended sort of many pieces of what this industry's been over the years. You took what we normally would call custom crush, where you can go into a place like Bin to Bottle or one of the other old school places and say, I'd like to make a wine, and we find out how expensive it is, and we find out how hard it is, and we find out how difficult it is to make a buck. Though I suppose custom crush is more about making a wine that you can sell later, but still you're sort of lending your personal touch to the wine. But then you're adding the experience of wine, the travel of wine. The people that come to you, are they tipping their, easy for me to say, are they dipping their toe in the water to say maybe, and it's only been going on for a year, so you don't know the answer to this yet, maybe, but like sort of saying, maybe I want to do this when I retire, or I've just made a bunch of money, selling my company. I think I want to do this. It'll be interesting to see how many people come out of your experience going, wow, I really enjoyed that. I want to do it full time. Absolutely.
And that's, again, another great question. I kind of liken it to that. I'm saying to people, here's the opportunity to essentially have your own winery and your own wine label, but on a much smaller scale. You don't have to worry about going off and selling it and all that kind of side of things, and traveling around the world selling your wine, or around the country selling your wine, and developing relationships with distributors and so forth. They don't have to do that. This is something that they can do. Again, it's something, it's a passion project for themselves, but you're absolutely right. If someone might, it could be that, and we're yet to see that, but if that is the case, then absolutely we can help them with that too. I had my own wine label. So I'm absolutely familiar with everything that goes into it, and all the logistics. So if they turned around and said, "Oh, we love this. We want to start doing this on a slightly higher scale," or they might turn around and say, "Well, maybe we don't want to do something that we a 3,000 or 4,000 case winery. We want to make a few more barrels." They can make as much or as little. Obviously we can't turn around and do 5 cases or something like that. That's slightly different. There's so much that goes into it, and a winemaker doesn't have time to do something, break up things like that. But they could split a membership, because of course it's expensive to join the club, But then when you realize what goes into it, all the logistics, and it's for the lifetime of your membership. But they can split a membership between 3 people to, if they say we want to start even smaller, they might say, 24, 25 cases of wine a year is too much for me. So they split the membership by up to 3 people, and then it's 8 cases of wine each. So it's very manageable. And by doing that, then they can say, well, that allows us to make wine in a number of different places. We could do a barrel of wine in Napa. We could do then a barrel of wine in Chile. We could do a barrel of wine, so they can start building up their own personal cellar. But yeah, I mean, it's yet to be seen if that's the case. But certainly if people then decide that that is something, like you said, if they then think, oh, this could be something I would like to do in my retirement, and maybe go a little bit further into it, of course we can help them with that. But it will be interesting to see if that does happen.
Well, it just seems natural, because I've not seen it. I've seen many services that take people on tours of Napa or Bordeaux. In fact, there's one in your neighborhood, Joanne Dupuis, who's part of the original wine tour. She's 95 now. She was, sitting with Lexus Lachine when Jim Bear got the phone call that he won the Judgment of Paris. She was doing this a long time ago, and that was tourism mostly. And this is a tough industry. It's tough to make money in. It's tough to get started. There's a lot of money. I even have a podcast coming up with a woman whose job it is to finance barrels. I mean, I didn't even know this type of job existed. Barrels are expensive, and just for the listeners, if you were to get a barrel of wine through Osiris, you would end up with 25, 28 cases of wine, right? And that's probably got
about 25. It's 25 cases of wine. Yeah, it's 300.
That's got to be the minimum, probably, to make it worth anybody's while.
It depends on the tier, because there's 2 tiers of membership. So at the top tier, where it's more expensive to join, there's a lot more perks. So we could do a half barrel for them. We could, for instance, we have a full brochure and a list of partnerships we have. We could go beyond for the top tier, and if we might be able to broker them a barrel somewhere else. They might say, "Oh, we were in Portugal last year, and we had found this wonderful winery. We love their wines." We don't have any relationships with any wineries in Portugal at the moment, but if they said that's somewhere we'd like to make our wine, I would personally try and broker a barrel for them with that winery. So it's not as restrictive. I mean, it's not restrictive at all, but they can really, there is a much more of a personal touch in the sense that we will go above and beyond to try and find what it is they want. But yes, and coming back to your question about barrels, I think I know the company you're talking about with your guest who's going to be on in a couple of months, because you're right, it's a very expensive thing to do. Making wine is not cheap at all.
No. So tell me then, since you're talking about Portugal, we just got back from there too. We were rerouted. We were supposed to go to Armenia, and I was supposed to do some podcasting with some Armenian winemakers, but the war started, and so we rerouted ourselves to Portugal and had a fabulous time there. But let's talk about that. When people come to this, and we'll talk about the tiers now too, and they say, what do you think their general knowledge of wine is? Is it, I understand what Bordeaux is. I've heard of Bordeaux. I've heard of Burgundy. I certainly know Napa or Sonoma or the Central Coast, but is there a vast range of existing wine knowledge when they come to you?
It's it differs, I think. There's some that are very much very knowledgeable, I would say, and I find that they are they really want to put that knowledge, I guess, to the test somewhat and see and really get involved in that blending process. And I think that's exciting for them, because they're almost thinking, oh, it's kind of the next step. I've learned so much about wine over the years, and appreciating it and tasting it and reading about it and experiencing tastings or whatever that may be. And I think it's exciting for them, the prospect of going on and thinking, oh wow, now I'm going that next level where it's really I'm part of the making of this wine. So I think there's definitely that. I think that there's others that you don't need to know everything about wine. I think some people can be a bit daunted, and I have had people that have said to me, I love wine, but I'm not sure if I would know what I was doing, going into a blending situation. I'm not a professional, and I say to them, you don't have to be. This is all just personal taste, and there will be the winemaker. The winemaker is going to be with you and guide you and talk you through everything. He'll be there side by side. You'll be physically blending the wines with him. He'll explain the process. He'll explain what he thinks works and why he makes his wines or her wines in a certain way, in a certain style. And, you'll be completely guided through the situation. So I'm trying to, that you don't have to be a professional by any means. It's supposed to be enjoyed. This is something that, it's not a test. We want you to enjoy yourself and have
That's
fun.
A good point.
And enjoy the experience,
That's a really interesting point. It's not a test. And I think one of my questions here when I started thinking about what you're doing, I have this serious issue with, and we talked about a little bit off camera about the swirling and sniffing and the tasting of cedar and what I really consider the aristocracy of wine. It's always had this air of affluence, and in certain cases, I think probably rightfully so. You're going to spend $1,000 on a bottle of Feet. Yeah, you probably should have some affluence and maybe an understanding of what you're drinking, and not just because you can afford it. That's two different things.
Right.
But it's actually, now that you're talking, I kind of sense this is breaking down that aristocracy, because most people cannot relate to you and me swirling a glass of wine and smelling and tasting. And, we have a certain affinity towards whatever we like. I love Burgundy right now, which is a very expensive habit. And then, but here you are immersing them in this concept and the conversations with the winemaker and what he or she's trying to do and what they want to get out of their wine. And all of a sudden, it becomes a little more natural. It becomes a little more organic, the process, instead of a bunch of guys sitting in a room with 1,000 glasses of wine on their table, sniffing and swirling, and we're going, what do we do?
Mm-hmm.
So is that?
Yeah, I think we're trying to make it a bit more accessible.
Do they feel like that's what's happening?
I think so, and I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it a little bit more accessible for people. There is this huge mystique about winemaking. You know, it's something that very few people in the world get to do. You know, it's not something that is, you know, there's millions of people out there doing it, and you know, we're trying to just pull the curtain back a little bit for our members and say we're giving you access somewhat to the inaccessible and what most people don't get to do, and we're trying to let you be a part of what goes on in terms of what can be quite a mysterious and you know, world. I mean, people, you know, of course, people understand wine, and the more they learn about it, the more, you know, they will understand the winemaking process. But, you know, without actually physically seeing winemaking or being a part of it, I think there is that certain level of mystery behind the whole thing and that romance. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think being a part of it is great. And I agree with what you're saying as well. We're trying to break down, you know, that kind of old mentality of, you know, you have to be a certain person to appreciate these wines. You're right. You know, it can be cost prohibitive, of course, but, you know, I remember when I do my tastings and for my own brand, which I'm concentrating more on this new business, but I have my own wine brand, my own wine label, which I started, as I mentioned before, in 2009. And when I would do tastings with people, I've written tasting notes, of course, for all of my wines, but I would keep them, you know, aside. And I wouldn't present people with the tasting notes when they came in and did the tasting. I wanted them to taste the wines first and tell me what they discovered and what they tasted. You know, I have this fear that when people do a tasting, they look at the notes straight away and they think, oh no, I must taste that, or I should taste that. And, you know, they feel like they kind of close themselves off because they think if I'm not tasting that, I'm wrong.
Right.
So I would say, please, I want to hear what you think. And it doesn't matter what, you know, if it's different, you know, what I write is what I taste, and everyone has a different palate. Sure. And these are not instructions. This is just what I taste. And of course, if they ask and they're adamant, of course, I'll give them the notes. But I want them to form their own decision and form their own tasting notes, you know, because it is a personal thing, I think wine. And it's that wonderful thing where, you know, you can really, you will learn so much more and you will taste so much more without those, you know, those blinders on, you know, and with that, I mean, by tasting notes. And you know, of course, there is a huge place for tasting notes. We need them. You know, I don't think they should ever be obsolete. But no. I feel that, you know, people will get so much more enjoyment from forming their own decisions and forming their own opinions on the wines. You know, that's what I think.
No, I think that's really important. Last night I went to a dinner party. You know, I brought some of the basic California stuff because I know that's what they would like. And there was a respect for the wines. I had a Camus, I had an Austin Hope. I think I brought a Silver Oak, just the basic stuff that people know. And if they see the label, they go, wow, this is fancy stuff. But as you and I know, not necessarily structurally that interesting, sort of the de facto Napa style that's out there. But we all know that there's wonderful acidic backboned wines from there. But they're starting to see that, you know, they're starting to understand the idea of terroir and where this complexity comes from, what this interest level is. And I think that's just natural. And I have this problem, not this problem. I have this question, and it's of winemakers, as of people like you, their industry is like, what is it about wine? I mean, wine was at the Last Supper, you know, wine has been around for thousands of years. And it never going to go away. It seems to be inherent in our soul. And it seems to be that same reason why when you do taste a complex Burgundy that's been of the soil, that you kind of go, wow, this is so different and so interesting. Can you define that reason? I mean, is it just heartfelt? Is it better if I go to one of your blending sessions as a consumer and I hear the winemaker tell me that, well, we grew this in clay soil, red clay, and this is where you're tasting that? Does that aid to my appreciation? I mean, I think it does, but I'm just wondering what you've heard.
I think for some it does. I think, you know, in terms of how I chose my partnerships with wineries, it was as much about the winemaker as the wine itself. You know, I found that, you know, winemakers have such fascinating stories, and you know, and you know, I love hearing what got them into the wine and making wine and what it is that they love about it. You know, as much as the wine itself, or like you said, the terroir or the vineyards that the grapes are coming from. I think it's that passion from the winemaker that you can taste in the wine every bit as much as the fruit. So, I love hearing people's stories. And I think for me, when I first started learning about wine, there is such a story behind it and there's such a history. And I fell in love with the history. I fell in love with, like you were talking about your guest, what a story. I mean, she was there when the Nazis came in, and a horrible story, obviously, but what an experience. And I think, for them to carry on and to persevere and to still be making wine now. I mean, it's just, to me, there is something so wonderful about that. And to go back to the romance of it, that there is. And I think for me with wine as well, it's one of those things that as much as I love learning more and more and more, you'll never know everything about it. And there's always more to learn. It's one of those things that will go on, like you said, forever. It'll always be there. And there's always more to learn. So I think it's almost like the gift that keeps on giving. It's the wine itself is wonderful, but everything that is associated with and goes along with it is every bit as wonderful, and I love that. And again, I do love the science of it, and I love that side of it. And I think that's fascinating as well. For someone like me, I'm that type of person, but every bit is that. It's the nostalgia, and wine is something I think that evokes memories, and whether that's a song or a time in your life or a place you visited. And that's what I love about this thing about, being able to make your own wine, what we're doing at Osiris. You will remember the wine because it's there in the bottle, but every time you open this bottle of wine that is so personal to you that no one else in the world has, unless you've
that's pretty cool, actually.
That you can sit at their table anywhere in the world and you'll tell them about this wine that you've created and you're thinking why you decided the wine should taste this way. And that wonderful experience you had, you could say, oh, this came from a time when I was in Montalcino and we had this wonderful time and we made this fantastic Brunello and we ate these wonderful meals, and that will stick with you for life. Every time you open that bottle of wine, there are going to be so many memories associated with it, not just from the time that you made it, but from the people you then got to enjoy this wine with over the years. I think that's wonderful, and I think, to be able to evoke that from something that you've created is wonderful.
You said a mouthful that I want to maybe try and drill some of it down. And one of them just is the fact that it's so experiential and a very emotional buy. It's a very emotional product. And May Eliane Langsong, at the end of this, 75-minute conversation, discourse, I had met her in 1993, and we'll get into the details of that part of the story. But at the very end, and I asked sort of a similar question I just asked you of her, and she said, well, look what it did for us. Look what wine has done for us. 40 years later, 30 years later, we're having a conversation. It made us friends, and we're friends because of wine. And then I thought about, wow, I'm doing this trip with my friends to Monaco, but we're stopping in Piemonte, we're stopping in Bordeaux, we're going to go up to Brittany, and it's all about wine. And I was thinking, what other product is there in the world? Like, you don't go to Europe to go get a new, digital song player, a digital iPad or something. You don't travel experience that. You don't travel to experience, a new tire iron. It seems to be the only product in the world where you would travel and your service would provide that opportunity to experience those things.
And brings people together so well,
Yeah, it's because of that experiential feeling, and it's like, I remember this all the time. You're a WSET, diploma WSET, and I think these are very important accolades and certifications to have. But at the same time, and I think in your position, it's important to have these accolades. But I find so many times that people of that of those degrees have not experienced, the daily grind of wine. We've tasted and we studied it and we read about it, and I think I heard this the other day at a speech about tactile learning versus book learning. We can read all the books we want, and well, here's a better example. Emmanuel Camigi, master of wine, a master somm, good friend. And he said exactly what you just said. He goes, when I took the test, I had to know about Argentina and maybe some Chile and certainly Australia, South Africa, a little bit of, the Bordeaux, Burgundy, and Napa. That's what I learned. But now there's Croatia and there's Armenia and there's Slovenia. And so we never do stop learning.
Right.
Because it changes so fast.
Yeah. And that's a great point that you made as well about, the difference between theoretical learning in terms of doing the WSET courses and whatnot, and and then the actual tactile sensation and experience of making wine. That was really what got me into that. That's how I ended up here in California. When I was becoming more and more involved or more interested in wine, and when I was doing the WSET classes, I was still working in advertising. But then I got to to where I did with the WSETs, and I said to myself, I think this is something I want to pursue. So I left advertising and I started a wine importing business back in Europe, and I was importing wines predominantly from South Africa because of my experience there, and boutique wines that hadn't been available in Ireland before, and I felt that they could really do well. And we were getting the big, I hate to say it, but the factory produced wines, and whilst they were great and they certainly have a place, I felt like there were so many wines that I was being exposed to that other people I thought would really, really enjoy. And unfortunately, that they weren't getting that opportunity, and I thought they could work. So I started that business. But before doing that, I thought, for no other reason than it might help me sell more wine. And when I have this business, I would love to do a harvest, just to have that physical understanding of winemaking, because I would really understand that side of it. Like you said, it's, that tactile side, which is very, very different. Of course, you're immersing yourself, a very different experience. So I reached out to a family friend who ran a wine store in Yorkville in California here. And I asked, anyone that might need an extra pair of hands for a harvest? I don't even need to be paid, to be honest. I just want to come out here and learn about winemaking. The experience will be pay enough for me. I want to go back and put that into good use. And I did. I came out here and I did a harvest, and I was very lucky to meet a guy. It was a custom crush facility, but one of the guys making wine there, Mark Harold, fantastic winemaker. He really took me under his wing, and he helped me and he guided me, and he came on board, and he was the one that spurred me on to start making my own wine. And we did stuff together for many, many years, and that's how I started my first label. And I started my first year and I made 200 cases of wine. It was very, very small, but then it went on, and at the end I was making 2,000 cases of wine. But it was that I didn't realize how much I was going to fall in love with that winemaking side of things, and I did. And that's when I moved out full time and I bottled my first vintage, and I've been here ever since. And that was 12 years ago.
That's a great story.
It's amazing. So that's why I really, that's another reason why I can see that people will love this opportunity with Osiris, because I know how much it meant to me, and it's changed the course of my life. I'm not expecting everyone to come in and start their own winery and do what I did for the last 12 years, but I just know the enjoyment I still get out of it. It is an experience like no other, making wine, and it's fascinating. And
well, they're gonna go to the next dinner party after they experience what you're doing. And let's talk about the levels here right now. But they're gonna go, wow, I just did this thing. I mean, it seems like word of mouth is going to be a huge part of what you're doing, because people are going to want to peel it back. And the mystery of wine is always going to be there no matter what. The mystery of wine exists between you and me, and we've been doing it a long time. And I still am more fascinated today than I was when I started with my father 35 years ago. And I want the listeners to understand that the WSET, Master of Somm, the Carter Sommeliers, and the Master of Wine, they're all great academic approaches to the world of wine. And as you said, the tactile experience of wine just has to come from practice. The only way you can really understand it all is to complete tasting, which isn't a bad thing either.
Yeah.
In fact, one winemaker told me years ago, and I've said this before on the show, I don't make a lot of money, he says, but I taste amazing wines, go to amazing places, eat amazing food, and hang out with the most amazing people. So it could be worse, right? So tell me now, you've got two levels. I read about it. You have two levels of participation with Osiris. What does that include, and what is it?
Okay, so with both tiers, obviously there's different price points depending on kind of what it is you're looking to get out of it. And with both, you have the opportunity to obviously make your own barrels of wine side by side with fantastic winemakers and fantastic vineyards all around the world. With the kind of, I would say, the more affordable tier, you are limited to the winery partners we have, but limited is probably not the word I should use, because we have wonderful winery partners and some of the best wineries, in their own particular regions in the world. And we're always going to be adding new winery partners, but we're very, specific about who we add. We want it not only to be, like I was talking about winemakers earlier on, it's not just about making great wine, it's about having great experiences. So we want to be able to go somewhere where we know they will have just this incredible experience with the winemakers, and they will learn so much, and that will be every bit as important as the wine. But anyways, for the more affordable tier, like I said, you can make wine with any of those wineries. You get to make wine just in one part of the world though each year, and with one winery, because there is so much that goes into it. Our job, there is an upfront fee, which is the initiation fee, which can sound a bit daunting price wise, but when you consider what goes into that, it's the logistics and everything that goes into your wine for the lifetime of your membership. So we're talking about all the licensing, the labeling, the liaising with the wineries, the liaising with the label designers, ordering your glass, your capsules, your corks. There's so much, the shipping, warehousing, everything, all of that goes into it, and you'll pay that one-off fee. And then of course you pay your barrel of wine each year. But yes, so like I said, you're limited to just making it in one of our locations each year. You can change every year. You can make a wine in Napa one year, the next year make it in Bordeaux, the next year make it somewhere else, but just one, because otherwise there would be so much involved in that, every year doing it with multiple different places, working out the logistics of getting your wine from France to here. There's a lot that goes into it. So when you come into the top tier, and at that level, you can actually split your wine membership by two people. So the initiation fee is $30,000. But then, there's two of you, obviously it's only 15,000 each, and you're not having to have your 24 cases or 25 cases of wine. You're not committed to as much. When you go to the top tier, there's lots more benefits in terms of you can make as much wine or as little wine as you want. You can split your membership by up to 3 people. You can make half a barrel in one place, half a barrel in another place, as much wine in as many places as you want every year. Again, we can go beyond, like we kind of touched on earlier on. They can make wine with all of our winery partners, but if they say there is something really special from a place that we tasted, like we used an example of Portugal, but it could be anywhere. They could have been on a vacation, or they could love a particular type of wine. I will personally try and broker a barrel or a half a barrel of wine from said winery. We have to let them know it's within reason. We can't go to DRC and say, "Oh, we want a couple of barrels." That's not going to happen. Let's be honest here. There's only so much we can do. Well, not yet, anyway.
Well, you never know.
Exactly. But if let's say for instance with one of the wineries they really like, we go to the winery and they say, well, we can't give you a barrel this year, but we probably can next year. But then we'll go back to our member and we'll discuss that with them and say, we can hang on till next year and you can make it somewhere else this year. You don't have to make wine every year. That's up to you as well. Or what I will do is I will go out and I'll say, we couldn't get the wine from this winery this year, but I have found 2 or 3 other wines that are very similar in style, very similar fruit, and I'll then present them to them and I'll say, we can get access to this wine and you can make wine from there this year if you like, and then we can move on to your chosen winery next year. I'll give them other options. I'll go that extra bit and the extra further kind of way to try and do as much as I possibly can to kind of get them what it is they're after. So, and there's various other.
I want to, for the listeners, want them to sort of understand and peel back the licensing and the fees. Yes, on the surface, you would think, wow, 30,000 seems like a lot of money. But, years ago when I was building my brands, I had put out an RFP, a request for a proposal or quotes to design some labels. And I got a huge range on a per brand basis. And I had put this out for like 6 brands at the time, 6 different ideas. And, one of them came back, it was $5,000 a label to design these 5 different, so $25,000 just for the label design. Got down to like $1,200, but still that's, substantial amount of money for an artist. They have to understand the rules of the TTB and the submission rules and all the legal parts of wine labeling. And that, you pay for that. That's part of the industry. Sourcing the wine, the rules behind alcohol content, the rules behind the pregnancy statement, the rules behind the size of the font, the rules behind, not having naked women on the label. I mean, all these things exist, right? And so I think those fees are, satisfactory to the idea that there's a lot that goes into this. Doesn't even.
And it's a one-off fee. You're paying that every year. That's for the lifetime of your membership. So.
Yeah, doesn't even include glass selection and all the cap colors you have to go through and all the things you got to do. What kind of cork you're going to, how you're going to finish the wine, right? All that takes time and energy, and then of course, storage and transportation, and that's changed a lot in our industry in the last few years since COVID, and so gone extraordinarily. I had people coming to my warehouse here in Monrovia when a distributor closed recently, no, when Epic sold to RNDC, a lot of small distributors that were using the same warehouse lost their square footage, and they looking for a place to scramble. That all that stuff plays into this. So I don't think that's exorbitant. I don't think that's actually pricey for what you're providing.
And that's the thing, when you break it down like that way to people, and you kind of help them to understand how much goes into it. I think people, a lot of times, they don't realize what goes into making a wine. There is a huge amount that goes into it. Of course, it's great to have that finished product, but everything that goes into it is there's a lot. It
kind of leads to my next point. It's sort of a philosophical point. It doesn't really have an answer, but we're going to Monaco, and I opened my big mouth and I invited like a lot of people. So now at some point I have 12 people in tow total to get to wineries in Piemonte and Bordeaux and stuff. And that's, that's a pretty big chunk of people to ask a winery to entertain. And one of my friends said, well, look, we're going to buy. So you tell these people, if you're having trouble getting appointments, you tell them we're going to buy stuff. Mm-hmm. And my response was, yeah, but that's not my relationship.
Right.
I've done this for a long time. I've known it forever. And so we're sort of at a different level of how we get into the wineries and who we talk to and who we get to see, the podcast, whatever. And then I recanted this thought and I said, well, they're in the business of selling wine. I mean, it probably should be encouraging and attractive for them to entertain us because they will buy something.
Yeah.
And sometimes the business of wine gets into sort of the romance of wine, right? And I think that's couldn't be any more evident than in Napa.
Yeah.
Now, could you and I start a winery in Napa tomorrow if we went and bought, 5 acres?
I mean, I think everything's got a cost, right? I think.
Well, will we make any money?
Right, we're making money. I mean, it's not the easiest way to make money, I would say, starting your own winery. Like I said, I would say you'd have to be in it for the long haul. There's a lot that goes into it, especially if you're making something. You got to consider when you're making let's say a Cabernet Sauvignon in Napa, that's 2 years in barrel before you've released anything. So you're paying for 3 harvests basically before you even start selling anything. So, they say the best way to make $1 million in wine is start off with 2.
Yeah, exactly.
It's definitely. But it's, again, it's one of those things. I would say be in it for the passion of it, be in it for the passion of what I'm making, and be in it for the love of it. And as you so rightly said earlier on, it's everything that goes along with it. I've had this wonderful 12 years doing it. I've met wonderful people. I've gone to wonderful places. I've tasted wonderful wines. I've had incredible experiences that money can't buy, really. Let's be honest. I mean, these are things that, I will carry with me for the rest of my life. And again, experiences, I know that when I have certain wines, it brings me back to a certain place or a certain time, or, even some of my own wine, the wine that I make for my own label, vintages, I'll remember every single vintage individually. Someone will say, oh, tell me about this vintage. And I'll say, I can tell you exactly about that harvest because I remember it. And I remember all of the different harvests that I had and all of the different, why a wine tastes different in every year. And I think that's wonderful, and it's those experiences are just, like I said, they're priceless, and I think, for me, I still get as much excitement when making wine. And I hope that my members will as well, that, they can come in on a day that the grapes are being picked. They can taste a grape and, to taste that grape then, and then to have it, I hate to use the pun, to come to fruition.
No pun intended.
Exactly. And when they're pouring that wine on a table with their friends or family or colleagues, I mean, what a great way. I mean, no one can talk to anyone through that wine better than they can. They can say, I was there when the fruit came in. And if they want to be in Napa when the fruit comes in, they can help source. They can be as much a part as they want. And to be able to say that I had that experience all the way through, and that wine is so mine, I am its own winemaker. What a great experience. Like I said, that so few have the opportunity to do. So
it's so interesting because last night was my best friends, my brother-in-law, some other friends. And the conversation always comes back to what the wines on the table are, and in an unintimidating way. In other words, we're talking about the romance of wine. That's where it's coming from. It's not. I'm not swirling and sniffing and saying, "Do you smell cedar?" We're just talking about the origin. We're talking about the value, and it's a rather innocuous conversation. Nobody's really threatened by it. You just talk about it, and it always brings people to the table. And I just find that fascinating about the industry we're in. And he said something about vintage early on, that 23 could be a great vintage. And that itself is another whole exciting conversation. But I'm wondering, with your people, do they really care? I mean, if you happen to catch a great vintage in Napa, which there haven't been any bad ones really lately, that they'll feel better about it, or really the winemakers saying, look, our job is to extract from this vintage the best that we can and express the vintage, express the fact that it rained at Harvard, express whatever we want. But does it matter to them?
I guess some people maybe not. Maybe they have that trust anyway within the winemaker, and they're I think personally it's great to, if every vintage was exactly the same, well then it wouldn't be that exciting, would it? I mean, it's great to
that's right.
Vintages. And with the 2023 vintage, for instance, it's just from conversations I've had with many winemakers who are just saying, we had so much rain at the beginning of the year, which was great, and it was a very steady growing season. It kind of went back to the vintages similar to, pre kind of 2013 and pre there, where, beginning before the drought, I guess, where the grapes get to hang out a little bit longer and go back to that traditional growing period where we're picking later again. Well, not necessarily later, but the way we always did. For many years we were picking earlier because of the, just the way that everything had gone that vintage. But all signs are looking good, and we have, access to wines that are already in barrel through the club. So, some people might think, oh, well, if I join the club, for instance, it's going to take me 2 years before I get a wine. Well, no, we have access to wines that are already in barrel. And they're all being, they're separately being aged, and then they can come in and blend. But it's going to be tough to get hold of these wines. I mean, with people praising this vintage so much, everyone's going to want to get their hands on it. And the allocations are going to be tight. But I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how things come out.
I when my club was in its heyday, which would have been up to the early 2000s, before all the phenomenal competition came in and a lot of influx of capital to make those clubs go, like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, et cetera. But the 89 vintage, which was a tough vintage for Napa, the wines were acidic, they had a lot of acid, and the 90 was so voluminous and voluptuous that eventually they couldn't, they could release the 90 before the 89. They couldn't put the 90 on the shelf with the 89. So they sort of just skipped the 89 to a certain extent. I made incredible deals on those, and they came around about 5 years later and were absolutely freaking phenomenal. So, I love that story because you don't always know. I mean, we can only guess as to what we certainly can guess on the outset, en premier kind of thing, whether or not the wine's going to be great, but it's the longevity and its life and how it's going to pan out. And I guess that's why the mystery of wine is so exciting and so fun to do.
Well, that was the same thing with the 2011 vintage for me. 2011 was a tough vintage in Napa. There was early rains. People were having to pick before, they thought the fruit was fully ripe. And, people were criticizing that vintage and saying it was a bad vintage. I personally think it's one of the best vintages we ever produced. I love it. It's very... It's the most Bordeaux style cab that we've ever made, for sure. It's kind of a little bit more restrained, a little bit lower in alcohol, not as punchy, but it's wonderful. And it really has developed over time fantastically. Brother, he got married a couple of years ago, and he asked, it was an honor. He said to me, "We'd love to pour your wines at the wedding." And of course I said yes. And I gave him an option. I gave him lots of different vintages and said, "Which would you like?" And without kind of prompting him and saying, "Oh, I like this," he picked the 11, and he said, "I think this is fantastic. Can we do this?" I said, "Of course." And I had held some back anyway, library wines, and that's what he chose to.
That's great. That's great.
You're right. These wines, you never know how they're going to turn around in years to come, and that's part of the excitement as well, right?
It's funny. Last night there's a Armenian wine called Voskevaz. Adani is the grape of Armenia, the main red grape. It creates a sort of Pinot colored wine with a little more backbone, and it still has lots of learning curve to do there. But there's a guy, he makes wine, it's called Voskevaz, and I think it's fabulous. And I've got nothing but, not rejection, but headwinds on that opinion from winemakers in Armenia, from people here in the diaspora that taste it. And they all sort of look at the Armenian wines that have been oaked in American oak, or they've been in new French oak. And I personally don't think the grape does well with oak. And I've had some agreement with that with some very good winemakers. Well, last night that was the first bottle we opened. Then we opened another bottle, the same grape, different maker, no oak. Then we went into the Camuses and the Austin Hopes, and And at the end of the night,
Mhm.
the general consensus was the most interesting wine was the Voskovaz. And
Right.
the reason is it was terroir driven and it was vintage driven. And so that's an interesting problem, because I had this
Mhm.
conversation with the CFO of Cheval Blanc once. How do you, and you said it already, that's why I brought it up. How do you build a brand around a style that, because it's where it's grown, let's say in Cheval Blanc's case, in Saint-Emilion, but maintain this idea we're going to be terroir driven and we want to express things, but still have a glass where you open that up and you say, what's the name of your brand?
Mhm.
What's the name of your brand?
Maze. Maze. M-A-Z-E.
Maze. So I want to make sure Maze, that it's familiar to my devotees every year that I make it, but at the same time I'm required to express what I was given by nature. Is that a tough thing to do?
It is. I mean, it is quite a tough thing to do. I think, because we can control everything once the grapes come into the winery, but we can't control what happened before. And, I think we can try and help it along, like you said, when we're tending the vineyards and we're keeping an eye on things. But, to some extent, we're at will, or well, to a big extent, we're at will to the weather, which is something we can't control, or, how everything changes year by year, which again is exciting. But, I guess the way we would, in terms of, because you spoke about oak, we would use certainly the same cooperages every year, but then again, the oak profile will change, depending on
That's true.
how the wine is. We might go heavier toast some years and we might put it back up. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, the fruits generally we use the same vineyards every year, and then the fruits, generally you can tell it's from a certain place for sure.
Right. That's the key.
Our Coombsville fruit is very noticeable compared to our stagecoach fruit, for instance. But yes, it does. It changes, and it changes every year. I think we can somewhat keep stylistically the wine and keep it the way we would like it. We
That's
don't
a good
want
way.
every year they're coming in at a high alcohol. We try and pick so that the grapes are coming in at around the same bricks where possible each year. But yes, there is obviously there are going to be variations each year. Which you would hope that isn't going to put people off so much. You try and make it as much in the same style as you can without putting people off, or giving them something they wouldn't expect. But it is interesting when customers of ours come back, people who are in the wine club or people who are fans of the wine, and they come back and they tell me what they find different about the wine from year to year. And they might say, "Oh, I've got one of your 2012s, and I opened it up with some friends the other day next to a 2014, and beside the age difference, we found this slightly different." Which was, I love hearing that. I love the feedback. I love hearing what people are getting from it. And and to me, I'll never get bored of hearing feedback on my wines, as long as it's good feedback, obviously.
I think that actually, yeah, right. Well, you get both, but I think that was a good word stylistically, in that you're not trying to infringe on what you've been given by nature, but you have a certain sort of style that you like to present, and you can influence that as a winemaker. You can do that, because and the opposite of that, is the biodynamic movement, where you don't do anything, and so you absolutely are only expressing what the vineyard produced. And I've tasted wines from some pretty famous places where, man, what a radical difference from vintage to vintage, with no thread of commonality, to hang your hat on. But I guess that's, what we're into. It's already been an hour, which I can't believe. And we probably could talk forever, but how do listeners get a hold of what you're doing and read more about it?
So we have they can come straight to the website. It's osirisclub.com. And they can there's a right at the bottom of the page, they can send off an inquiry form. We give some information about what we do on the website, but it's more of like a landing page, because we structure the 2 tiers, but there's no pricing on there, and it doesn't talk about our wineries. If they get in touch with me, of course I'll get straight back to them, and I will send them the brochure. I'll send them some of the press coverage we've received, and I'll try and set up a call with them to kind of give them more of an insight into what we're doing and more of an introduction. I don't want to put everything on the website. I feel like I want it to be some mystery behind the club. I want, it's a club that we want people to kind of reach out and to kind of inquire about, and I think it's great to be able to set up a call, just because, whilst the brochure is great and it's a great introduction to who we are, I think there's so much more beyond that. You can't really encompass exactly what it is that they'll get from just being able to read the brochure. So I would certainly encourage people to get in touch, and I'll get straight back to them and hopefully set up a call. So
So osiris.com. And actually, if you Googled it, which you did, and sent me some links, there's lots of recent articles about what you're doing. And we didn't talk about a lot of things I wanted to get to, but we can do that the next time.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic.
Certainly when we were up in Napa probably 5 to 7 times a year. If you're around, we'll tilt the glass and see what's going on.
Wonderful. Yeah, it'd be wonderful.
We Yountville mostly, but and we're very excited because Poncha's, the famed motorcycle bar, is coming back.
Yep, it's been closed for a long time since pre-pandemic, and it's a great place. Like you said, as of its location, it's Yountville it's almost like Disneyland. Everything is so perfect, and that's great. Right. And you got Poncha's end, which is very different.
Actually, we were looking for a house there. This is right after the pandemic, and I'm looking at this piece of property, and Poncha's got pretty good square footage for a little town like that, and it's just down the a few steps from French Laundry and across the street from a hotel. I thought, I wonder if there's any development opportunities here. So turns out that the woman that was brokering a house for us, we never have bought yet, but she goes, I had dinner with the owners last night, and I said, oh great, they want $14 million.
Yeah, it's crazy. Because it's done.
That's nuts. I'm sorry. So I guess they're never got it, and now they're just going to go back to serving drinks. But I understand. I'd never been there. I didn't get to go before, but I understand it's sort of like where the suited businessman and wine meets the winemaker and meets the motorcycle guy.
It's brilliant. So you go in there, and like you said, it's very close to French Laundry. So you could have people that come in after French Laundry for a drink, for a nightcap. You could have winemakers in there, and like you said, you could have bikers. You will literally meet every type of person, every demographic in the world,
really
which
fun.
I think is great, right?
That's really great. You go to French Laundry, have a Grand Cru Burgundy, and then you end up at a well cocktail from Poncha's.
Absolutely, or a PBR, exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Pleasure to have you on the show, and I appreciate the time and good luck with what you're doing, Paul. I think it's really exciting, and I will certainly spread the word around to people that are interested in sort of experiencing the wine world without having to invest heavily in their life savings.
Right.
Like you said, the $2 million to $1 million.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul McSharry. Don't forget to subscribe because there's more great interviews on their way. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.